California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. Mike Spence is back. He is a member of the West Covina City Council, but today we're speaking to him again as a member of the Executive Board of the California Republican Party. And I would like to speak with you about the recent midterm election. I think it's fair to say the Republicans had a pretty good day nationwide and not a bad day in California. Not a bad day. Let's talk about the constitutional offices, which is kind of, we'll go from the not so good news to the better news. No Republican won statewide constitutionally.
Right.
But do you feel as if there were some strides made?
Well, obviously, if you look at the percentages, everybody did better than Meg Whitman did with a lot less money.
Right.
So when you start, doing those kind of calculations, it wasn't that bad. And actually, it was interesting. Pete Peterson, I think if he had money, he could have won that seat because, he ended up getting, I think, 47% of the vote. And he really made a case, focused on the office and what it does.
Right.
And I think that made a big difference, and the newspaper endorsements, too.
I was wondering why Ashley Swearingen, the mayor of Fresno, didn't do better. Although she didn't do terribly. She got about, what, 46? Yeah. She was running for controller against Betty Yee. What happened there? It seemed like she faded.
Yeah, I think there, there's obviously money issues. Mm-hmm. She started getting wrapped up in different controversies about, did she endorse the
Republican nominee for governor,
et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. So I think there were some distractions, but I think it really had to do with focusing on the office again. I think that's where Pete Peterson was very successful, where he focused on these other functions of the Secretary of State. I'm better than my opponent. I'm not sure she was able to do that with Betty Yee. Betty Yee's been around a long time, and no one's going to say she's not qualified and she doesn't know what she's doing. So I think that was one of the issues too.
What's so interesting to me is how there really were distinctions between the 8 offices and who did better and worse. And the ones that many thought would do better did, and the ones we thought wouldn't didn't. And really, people talk about the voters, how they're not informed, but they're somewhat informed. I mean, if the races came out the way they did, they're making distinctions.
Well, obviously somebody is. People are making distinctions, and there's a drop-off sometimes in different ballots and elections in different places. And so obviously, some voters are making distinctions and making choices. And of course, that's important. I mean, in a lot of states that are, and actually most states that are heavily Democratic, when they elect Republicans, it's because Republicans were able to make a certain appeal to those independent-minded voters that just don't punch a ticket.
And let's talk about those Democratic states that elected Republicans, because wow, you have the bluest of blue, deep blue states voting for Republican governors. Illinois. Although that was a case where the Democratic governor was not very popular. But Maryland.
Nor very good.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know enough. Maryland and Massachusetts. I mean, those were 2 newbies running for the first time for those offices, and Republicans win.
Yeah, Maryland's actually very interesting because the Republican candidate spent a lot of time, starting like 2 years ago, focusing on the tax increases being done in Maryland.
Right.
Doing social media, Facebook stuff. And so he really had a following focusing on that. And I think, they went really too far in Maryland, again, on tax stuff. They were taxing. If you had a driveway, you had to pay a tax because it runs off into the sewer. They called it a rain tax, stuff like that.
Here's the thing.
So I think they focused well there.
Illinois, we saw coming. Massachusetts.
Well, Massachusetts, she's a failed candidate.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
She has snatched defeat from the jaws of victory twice.
Yes, exactly.
So that wasn't a huge surprise.
Yeah.
Maryland.
Maryland, no one saw it coming. No one saw it coming, and that's because pollsters stopped polling it.
Right.
Same with Virginia. They didn't see how close that would be. Even here in California, Jim Costa.
Right.
Almost got beat.
Let's talk about California. I want to get back to that and talk about the congressional races. Nationwide, the Republicans picked up, I believe, 13 seats in the House, which is pretty good.
Considering with a majority,
pretty good. But if they had done as well throughout the nation, in California, as they did throughout the nation, they should have picked up more. And in every single close congressional race in California, the Democrats pulled it out in the end. In every single one. I mean, I don't consider the Valadeo race really a close race, or the Denham race. I mean, those are 2 Republican congressmen that theoretically could have been vulnerable.
But they're very popular.
Yeah, I don't. But the other 4, Ami Bera, Scott Peters, Julia Brownlee, and who am I missing? Jim Costage.
Jim Costage was close. He also had, Chabot was very close with Aguilar. You had down in the desert, you had Nastandi that was, well, he didn't do that well. But
Right, but my point is what happened? Why, in the end, did these Dems squeak out victories when they weren't in the rest of the country?
Well, I do think there was a problem. I don't think some of those candidates were emphasizing the issues that were causing the wave to happen. You know, you didn't hear a lot about Obamacare. You didn't. You know, there were candidates that were afraid to talk about the issues that people in the rest of the country were talking about.
Although Obamacare continues to be a little more popular here.
Well, that would be the argument, but you know, you're not going to catch a wave if you're not trying.
Right.
And then I think you had some. I mean, special circumstances. The DeMaio thing. I mean, the whole that was all crazy with lawsuits.
Right.
And I think the National Republican Congressional Committee. You know, they missed some. You know, they weren't in the Chabot Aguilar race.
I think
close.
the one they
and they weren't. They missed Costa completely.
Right, they missed Costa. I mean, the Chabot race. I mean, I think Pete Aguilar
weren't in it,
probably.
But they weren't in that.
Right.
They, you know, it was 2,000 votes or something.
Right.
And you know, instead they were investing in other races that you know had more problems.
But what's remarkable about the fact that the Democrats squeaked out victories in the tough congressional races in California, they lost virtually every close contest in the state assembly and the state legislature. I mean, the only race that was targeted that they seemed to pick up was the Jackie Irwin Rob McCoy seat in Ventura County.
Right, but we picked up Hadley in the South Bay.
I mean, who saw that coming? That's the Al Marisucci seat. I mean, other than the Jackie Irwin race, every close seat the Republicans won. 4 out of 5 in the assembly, 2 to 3 in the state senate.
Correct.
How does that work? How is it?
Well, it's because I think those candidates did emphasize some of those issues about the wave, and they had a good ground game, and I think they were more focused than the National Committee stuff was, and we didn't have the problems like, you know, they had in the Scott Peters DeMaio race with all the lawsuits, sexual harassment, all that crazy stuff.
Right.
And so I think those were some of those differences.
Did you see it coming?
I saw those assembly races coming.
You did?
Yeah, absolutely.
So
I mean, because I could tell, because that's what I was doing. I was working. So I could tell those were going that way.
So where does the California Republican Party go from here? Because obviously they've picked up some momentum, able to stop the supermajorities of the Democrats.
Right.
But, you know, top of the ticket, you know, Mr. Kashkari just got walloped.
Yeah, you know, I think what's happening and what's going on now is that there's a lot of focus on the local level because about half the elected officials in California at the local level are Republicans. And
we're talking about
school boards, city councils, and that's where other candidates come from. That's where we get good candidates from. So I think there's been a focus on that and being effective at that level. But I think, you know, there's some hope if we can get good candidates and get some money together and have them focus on a clean, solid message. I think clearly we can be successful in California.
I'm wondering, though, in light of what's happening with the immigration debate, and whether you agree with the president's decision to take executive action or not, immigration is an issue that does seem to help Democrats in California. And again, you know, when the president says loudly, pass a bill, Congress, if you don't like what I did, pass a bill, you know, that's a tough message when you have a state that is, you know, supportive of immigration reform and the Congress is not passing a bill. What do you do with that?
Well, you know, actually, immigration has helped Republicans in the state of California in 1994, for example. I think it did help.
Well, but wait, let's go there because some would argue that it helped them in 1994 and decimated them from that moment on.
Well, I think it's how you talk about it. I mean, when we look at other states, you know, that we were talking about, I mean, Republicans in Georgia were getting, you know, close to 40% of the Hispanic vote.
So, what's the problem? Why is it that can't happen in California?
Well,
it
what
happens in Texas. It happens in Georgia. Why is it not happening?
Well, in California, we're kind of weird as a Republican Party. One, we don't have a position. The Republican Party doesn't have a position on immigration. There's all kinds of different positions within the Republican Party.
Here?
Yeah, in California. You know, there's some that are more aligned to an amnesty. There are people opposed to it, et cetera. But then I think there's a fear of talking to voters and Latino voters in particular about issues that we can, you know, appeal to them on cultural issues or education. Those are two issues where I think we don't do enough talking and working with the Hispanic community. So, I mean, my district, I mean, I'm the only Republican on the West Covina City Council, and, you know, I live in a Latino city. I mean, and I was on a Latino school board. You know, my school board
was
all
Latino children.
Yeah, exactly, and I was, you know, still there. And so I think you can be successful if you talk about issues directly and honestly and don't be afraid. But you have to go talk to people. We don't go talk to people. We just don't do enough of that.
His name is Mike Spence. He's a member of the West Covina City Council. He is also on the executive board of the California Republican Party. I'm Brian Pomerance. It's California Edition.